Topic tonight based on Exodus chapter 32 through 34, rebellion, mediation, and restoration. And I actually stole this directly from a commentator who says that this is the message that these chapters are intended to convey. Rebellion, mediation, and restoration. What do we mean by that? The people of Israel rebelled with the golden calf scene. Moses then became the mediator, acting between them and God to ask for forgiveness, and then God restores and brings everything back to putting the plan back on track. Okay? So, I've got quite a bit to cover here in this section. I'm just going to leave up this slide of rebellion, mediation, and restoration, and I'm just going to go through here these three chapters. Father, I ask that you help us to worship you in the way that you desire. I ask that you would help us to not make golden calves, that we would always stay in the center of everything that you want for us and the direction that you want us to go. Keep us from idols. In Jesus' name. I mentioned in previous weeks that Exodus 32 through 34 is an action scene in between two instruction scenes. And so again, Exodus chapter 25 through 31 is God's instructions to Moses about how to build the tabernacle and its elements. Exodus 35 through 40 is Moses then conveying that instruction to the people and them actually executing that and building those things. And in between, we get these three chapters of action scenes, series of actions that involves Moses and God and the people, and Aaron as another kind of main character. Moses is 40 days and 40 nights on Mount Sinai, and the people begin to get restless. They are panicking that he's not coming back, and when he and then before he returns, the panic turns into frustration and even anger. They say to Aaron about Moses, this Moses guy, and in English that phrase sounds snarky, and that's how it would sound in Hebrew. The way that they were saying, this Moses guy, it was not a respectful way of referring to him. And they say to Aaron, we need to make some gods, plural, so that we have somebody to lead us. Aaron then collects the gold from the people. He fashions it with an engraving tool and makes it into the image of a calf. And the people said, Israel, these are your gods, plural, who brought you up from the land of Egypt. The fact that they refer to the calf as gods may indicate that they are reverting back to polytheism on some level. Israel, these are your gods who brought you up from the land of Egypt. I want you to key in on a couple of phrases here. Who brought you up from the land of Egypt? That is what God said. I am Yahweh. I am the God who brought you out of Egypt. And now they're saying, these are your gods who brought you up from the land of Egypt. Here is reading now from beginning verse 5 of chapter 32. When Aaron saw this, he built an altar in front of the calf, and made an announcement, there will be a festival to the Lord tomorrow. Early the next morning they arose, offered burnt offerings, and presented fellowship offerings. The people sat down to eat and drink and got up to party. Let me key in on a couple of words there. Aaron said there will be a festival to the Lord tomorrow. The word festival is the same word, either festival or feast. When God said you will celebrate the feast or the festival of the Passover, you will celebrate the feast or the festival of unleavened bread. In other words, God gave the Israelites these commands to celebrate these feasts or festivals. And now here they are, Aaron is saying, we will celebrate a feast or a festival. Same word, but it wasn't the one that God told them to do. A festival, notice, to the Lord, capital L-O-R-D. In other words, this is Yahweh. The gods that the people said, Israel, these are the gods, the golden calf, these are the gods that brought you out of Egypt, is not that word, but Aaron says, we're going to worship Yahweh. So it's not an all-out false god worship. It's a hybrid worship type of thing. But Aaron is saying we will worship the God, the one true God, Yahweh, in the morning. Then the people got up, they rose, they burnt offerings, etc., etc. They sat down to eat and drink. They got up to party. The word party means to make merriment. It means to laugh. In Genesis 26, verse 8, this word is used when it says Isaac was sporting with his wife Rebekah. Sporting. And so it may indicate that shade of meaning may indicate that there was some sporting going on in that sense. Don't know for sure, but that's the idea of the party. The bottom line is that the Israelites, watch now, okay, remember these key phrases. These are the gods who brought you up from the land of Egypt, hearkening back to, that's what Yahweh did. It's a festival, which is what Yahweh told them to do. It is to Yahweh. Aaron says that directly, okay? And so watch what happens here. The people are worshiping Yahweh. In other words, worshiping God for who he is. They are also worshiping Yahweh for what he has done for them, which is to say, he brought them out of Egypt. They're also worshiping Yahweh according to his own patterns, which is to say, the festival. They're also worshiping Yahweh's presence, which is to say, the golden calf idea was that here we fashion this golden calf, and Yahweh, perhaps other gods as well, will inhabit, or kind of their presence will sit on this calf. In other words, the calf is a substitute for the ark. Instead of God's presence resting on the ark, the idea is God's presence will rest on this calf. They were not thinking in terms of they make this calf and they're actually saying that the calf is God or that the calf is a god. They're not saying that. They're making a representation. This calf represents God, and we expect that God's presence rests on this calf, or that the God's presence, G-O-D-S, presence rests on this calf. So again, they're worshiping Yahweh. They're worshiping Yahweh for what he's done for them, bring them out of Egypt. They're worshiping Yahweh according to his own patterns, that is to say the feast or the festival. And they're worshiping Yahweh's presence, that is to say they are saying that the presence of God is resting on this calf. Is the problem that they tried to worship other gods? Somewhat. But the real problem is that they tried to worship the real God in their own way. They took everything about the one true God and spun it. Don't spin God. That's what they did. They took God and they spun it to make it what they wanted it to be. And if you don't think that's going on in the modern American church today, you're out to lunch. Okay, you can attempt, watch this now, people of God in the modern day. You can attempt, this is a lesson for us to learn. You can attempt, and I'll speak to the people in the e-world on the videos. You can attempt to worship God, the one true God, Yahweh, and fail miserably and completely. You do not get an A for effort, and it's not the thought that counts. You have to do it his way. And that is still true today. True worship of the Most High God is accomplished through Jesus Christ alone. And it must be the real Jesus and not a fake Jesus that you make up. So, God says to Moses, you need to get down there and get out of my way because I'm going to destroy him. And Moses begins phase 1 of his intercession, of his mediation between God and the people. He says to God, why should the Egyptians say that God brought these people out only to destroy them? And so Moses goes down with Joshua, and they come down and they begin to hear singing. It's very possible that this singing was praise and worship music. Basically akin to the Exodus 15 scene right after they've crossed the Red Sea. Essentially, the people are doing a do-over. Moses comes down the mountain, he hears the singing, and he becomes enraged. Now, God had already told Moses what the people are doing. But he doesn't get upset and throw the tablets down and break them until he hears the singing. Have you ever been to a movie and there's this point in the movie, it's a drama, let's say. Could be a comedy, but it's a drama. And there's this point in the movie where this really poignant part. And, you know, the main characters are coming to this realization of something, and it's very heart-wrenching, and you feel that in your heart, and yet you're not affected really until the music begins to play. And then the soundtrack comes on and the music is in the background, and all of a sudden what was in your mind as this is a special thing. When the music happens, your whole body comes alive to say, this is a special thing. And maybe you start crying or start laughing or whatever the response is, okay? Maybe that's what's happening here with Moses. God has told him, get down there. The people are rebelling. Here's exactly what's happening. So he knows up here what's going on. But when he gets down there and he actually sees and hears the singing and understands that there's false worship going on, not as much worship of false gods as it is worship of God the wrong way, he becomes enraged and he throws down the tablets and they break the tablets with the Ten Commandments on them. Okay. When he breaks those tablets, it's as if to say there is no law because they're already breaking the law. In fact, they're breaking commandment number 2 right off the bat. And so Moses comes down to the people and he draws a line in the sand, so to speak, and he says, whoever is for Yahweh, whoever is for the Lord, come stand with me. Okay, let's look at this, verse 26. Depending on the translation, whoever is for the Lord, whoever is for Yahweh. Other translations say whoever is on Yahweh's side. The actual Hebrew, it's just me, Yahweh. There's no extra stuff. It's just God and me. I'm with him. Are you with him or not? Okay? Moses says, get over here with me if that's you. Whoever is for Yahweh, get over here. All People's Church is a church for him. For him. Again, I want you to get this picture. We just went through this a second ago, but I want you to get this. The Israelites are worshiping Yahweh, in other words, worshiping God for who he is. They're worshiping Yahweh for what he has done for them, that's to say, brought them out of Egypt. They're worshiping Yahweh according to his own patterns, that's to say, the festival. They're worshiping Yahweh's presence in terms of resting on the golden calf as opposed to resting on the ark. They're doing all of those things, but they were not worshiping Yahweh for him, for his own sake. They were worshiping him, but they weren't even on his side. And I'm reminded of Abraham Lincoln when one of his advisors had said to him something along the lines of, "I'm grateful that God is on our side." And Abraham Lincoln said, "Sir, my concern is not whether God is on our side. My greatest concern is to be on God's side." Moses says to the people, "Come get over here with me if you are for Yahweh." Our worship can look right in many aspects and many dimensions, but if we're not doing it for Him, if we ourselves in our inner man are not for Him, we cannot be worshiping God for ourselves. It's to be for Yahweh. It is not to be into Yahweh for me. Too many people are into fringe benefits, and they're not actually into the Lord Himself. The Levites join Moses when he calls for those who are for Yahweh. This should not be taken to mean that none of the other people from the other tribes were for the Lord, because then not all the other tribes were wiped out, okay? But the Levites joined Moses. Moses says to them, "Take your sword and kill those who are not for Yahweh." There were about 3,000 who were killed. This is out of, again, about 2 million people. So God responds then to the Levites by, you know what happens with the Levites, right? The priests come from the Levites, and it is the honor to that decision that they made to be for the Lord, that comes about, that the priests come from the Levites. And it says that God Himself is their inheritance. Okay, Moses says to the people, okay, all right, after all that's taken care of, y'all still need atonement. I'm going to go back up the mountain and see what I can do. So Moses goes back up the mountain. He says, "God, forgive them." God says, "The ones who sinned I will erase from my book, but y'all go on to the place that I said." Chapter 33, God continues the language of promise that we've seen so many times now, going back into Genesis. He's reaffirming, go to the promised land. It's flowing with milk and honey. I will drive out the tribes there. But then He says something interesting. He says, "I'll send my angel ahead of you to guide you, to lead you, but I'm not going to go with you personally. Because if I do, I'm liable to kill everybody because you're stiff-necked people." And the people then, when they heard that, they mourned and they took off their jewelry. The Bible says that they didn't wear the jewelry for the rest of their time. Then we get the story of Moses pitching a tent. And we need to talk about that for a second. That little piece about him pitching a tent almost seems like it kind of comes out of nowhere, but he pitches the tent. They call it the tent of meeting. We need to understand that that is not the tent we talked about last week. They have not gone and crafted all the elements of the tabernacle where the Ark of the Covenant will sit and all that. They haven't done that yet. So this is a different tent. This is a temporary pre-tabernacle tent. It's called the tent of meeting. Later on, the tabernacle also is called the tent of meeting. So I don't want you to be confused by that. These are two different tents. They're both called the tent of meeting. But this one is Moses goes to meet with God. Okay? And let's see. Keep going. So Moses says to the Lord, "You said to go do this thing, to go to the promised land, to do our conquest and all this, but you haven't told me who all is supposed to go." In other words, which people are going to come with us? You know, we had this whole fiasco about those who were not for Yahweh. And God says to Moses, "My presence will go with you." Now, our English fails us on this one because the "you" there is singular. It's real easy to read that and say, "My presence will go with you," and God is just saying, "I'm just going to go with you, Israel." But He's actually saying to Moses, "I will go with you," singular. Okay? And Moses' response was, in other words, God is saying, "I'll go with you, my presence will go with you," singular, Moses. But as for everybody else, the angel will lead them. And Moses' response is, "Please go with us." In other words, he's still interceding. He's still the mediator between God and the people. and wanting God to go with them as a group. No, don't just go with me, but go with everybody. If you don't, this is Moses talking to God, if you don't come with us, don't even make us go. And many a sermon has been preached on that thought. God says, okay, I'll do it. So God's going to go with all the people, with Israel, as they go on this journey to have the conquest of the promised land. Moses' response to that is, show me your glory. Well, what kind of a response is that? That's almost nonsensical. It doesn't seem to flow when God says, okay, I'll go with you. And Moses says, show me your glory. What is he saying there? See, we say that phrase a lot, show me your glory, right? And we say it in the sense of, God, we want to know more of you. We desire to come closer to you, etc. And there's nothing wrong with that, okay? But that's not the point, because that wouldn't make sense. That wouldn't be a logical response to, I'll go with you. God says, I'll go with you. Okay, show me your glory. It doesn't go together like that, okay? So then what is he saying? Moses is basically asking God for a confirmation. God, you just said you're going to go with us. Confirm that. Confirm that to me. Here's the way one of the commentators says it. Moses is not asking God to show him his glory simply to satisfy his curiosity or some deep spiritual longing. He is in effect asking God for some demonstration of the promise he has just made. He is asking God to, quote unquote, put it in writing. Okay. God says, okay. So show me your glory. God says, okay, but I can't let you see my face. My goodness will pass before you, but you're not going to see the full effect of my glory. You're not going to see my face, because anybody who sees my face will die. This is not a contradiction of what we just read in the previous chapter, which says that Moses met with God face to face. You see how easy it would be for somebody to look at that and say, well, that's a contradiction. It just said he was face to face. Well, no. It's just two different levels, two different ways of saying something. Moses met with God face to face, meaning there was a close encounter there in the tent of meeting. But God is saying, you can't see my face and live. If I show you the full revelation of who I am, you can't take it. We might say it this way. You can see the back of my glory, but not the face of my glory. Okay? So, with all that said, question, and this is kind of a pre-application before we get to the application. Is it appropriate for us to ask God to see his glory? Or for us to ask God to see his face? We have songs about this. I've written songs about this. We're actually going to sing one on Sunday. And I'm not pulling it. Okay? We're going to sing it on Sunday. We want to see your glory. We want to see your face. Is that wrong? No, it's not wrong. We just need to understand what it is we're saying, and we need to make sure we don't say it and understand it the wrong way. Here's what would be the wrong way. You can say to God, I want to see your glory, I want to see your face. And it can be almost idolatry. In other words, I care so much about this close encounter that I've put that idea of a close encounter at the top of my list rather than merely following God like I'm supposed to. It's not, it is right. It's good and right and proper to want to know more of God and to be closer to him. Nothing wrong with that. When we get in trouble is when we see his glory and seeing his face itself as becoming an idol. In other words, Here's what I mean by that. We are not content with merely living the life of faith that he's called us to. We want it to be more real. Watch out. Watch out.
We can't set the terms.
That is not what this story is about. That's not what this story is about. This story should not be read as a prominent biblical figure, Moses, expressing his desire to draw so near to God that he has a special revelation of him. That's not what the story is. The story is not that Moses is desiring greater levels of intimacy. We like that word in charismatic circles, and there's nothing wrong with that. But that's not what the story is about. And then the idea is not for us to take that wrong interpretation of the story and then make the application that story is saying that it's prescriptive for us today, that's what we should do. Show me your glory, show me your face. And again, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with wanting greater levels of intimacy and relationship with the Lord. I'm just saying that this passage is not modeling that, and it's not describing that. Not prescribing that. Instead, what are we saying when we say, show me your glory? When we sing, we want to see your glory, we want to see your face. We should really be thinking of that as figuratively saying to God, number one, do all you have in mind to do. Put it in writing. And number two, it's a trusting faith. We're just along for the ride. You've said this is what you want us to do, so we're going to do it. Meet our yes with your everything. Chapter 34, Moses cuts 2 fresh stone tablets and heads back up the mountain. Let me read beginning in verse 5. The Lord came down in a cloud, stood with him there, and proclaimed his name, the Lord. The Lord passed in front of him and proclaimed, the Lord. This is Yahweh. Yahweh is a compassionate and gracious God, slow to anger and abounding in faithful love and truth, maintaining faithful love to 1,000 generations, forgiving iniquity, rebellion, and sin. How many generations? 1,000. But he will not leave the guilty unpunished, bringing the consequences of the father's iniquity on the children and grandchildren to the 3rd and 4th generation. How many generations? Iniquity, 3rd and 4th generations. Righteousness, 1,000 generations. Moses, verse 8, immediately knelt low on the ground and worshipped. Then he said, my Lord, if I have indeed found favor with you, my Lord, please go with us, even though this is a stiff-necked people. Forgive our iniquity and our sin, and accept us as your own possession. And the Lord responded, verse 10, look, I am making a covenant. Watch how the language begins to shift. In the presence of all your people, I will perform wonders that have never been done in the whole earth or in any nation. And we begin to get that language that we're used to now. I'm now making a covenant. In other words, I'm restoring what I said I was going to do. And then we begin to see the rest of that chapter. God begins to rearticulate the promise and covenant language that, again, we've seen all the way back into Genesis. And it begins to sound a lot like some of what he gave Moses in chapters 20 through 23. Moses was on the mountain 40 days and 40 nights again. And this time when he comes back down the mountain, with the 2 stone tablets are freshly inscribed with the 10 commandments. And his face shone brightly, even though he didn't know that was going on. He told them everything that he was told, them the Israelites, and then he put a veil over his face. When he would speak with Yahweh, he would remove the veil, but when he came back to the people, he would wear the veil. Some people think this continued on all the way until Moses died. That's an interesting thought, because when you read it romantically, you don't think about that. The veil over the face obviously is a precursor of the tabernacle, where the veil separates and shields the presence and glory of God from just anyone who might see it. It's really protecting the people. It's really protecting the people. Oh, it's chapter 32. Okay, so back to chapter 32 for a second. So second look segment. I want to, again, bring in New Testament a little bit, as we're used to doing. I want you to get an idea of the book. Okay, let me read from chapter 32 of Exodus, beginning in verse 31. Moses returned to the Lord. This is after the golden calf. Oh, these people have committed a grave sin. They have made a god of gold for themselves. Now, if you would only forgive their sin, but if not, please erase me from the book you have written. Now, that can't be for real. That has to be hyperbole. Kind of like Paul one time says, I could almost endure hellfire. It's hyperbole. Anybody like Moses or Paul would know better than to actually give up his place with God forever. But he's just saying to God, this is how much this means to me. Please don't do this. And the Lord replies, verse 33, the Lord replied to Moses, whoever has sinned against me, I will erase from my book. So the ones who have sinned, I will erase from my book. Okay, let's look at the book of life in the New Testament. First of all, a different translation says this, whoever sins against me, I will blot him out of my book. Let's look at Revelation chapter 20, verses 11 through 15. Then I saw a great white throne, this is John speaking, and one seated on it. Earth and heaven fled from his presence, and no place was found for them. I also saw the dead, the great and the small, standing before the throne. Watch this now. And books were opened. Another book was opened, verse 12, which is called the Book of Life. And the dead were judged according to their works by what was written in the books. Then the sea gave up the dead that were in it, and death and Hades gave up the dead that were in them. Each one was judged according to their works. Death and Hades were thrown into the lake of fire. That is the second death, the lake of fire. And anyone, verse 15, whose name was not found written in the book of life was thrown into the lake of fire. So here we begin to see in the New Testament the book. God is saying to Moses is saying to God, we want to be in your book. Okay. God says, I'm going to take out the people in the book who sinned. The 3,000 at least, will be not in the book. And now in the New Testament, we get this extra understanding of what this book is about. There's a book of life, and your name is written in it. And that's a good thing, because that means you will have eternal life. And if your name is not written in it, or if it's blotted out, you won't have eternal life. Okay? Look at Revelation 21. Verse 27, talking about the New Jerusalem, nothing unclean will ever enter into it, nor anyone who does what is detestable or false, but only those written in the Lamb's book of life. Revelation 3, verse 5, he who overcomes. Now this tells us how to be in the book and how to not take yourself out of the book. Revelation 3, 5, he who overcomes shall be clothed in white garments, and I will not blot his name out from the book of life, but I will confess his name before my Father and before his angels. So, the idea of the book of life, we receive Jesus, and he puts us into the book, so to speak, and those who do not receive Jesus, their name is blotted out of the book. You want to be in that book. Amen? All right, application. We've made a lot of application already tonight. I've made a lot of points for modern day living already tonight. But just to wrap something up here, I thought we would go back to something I kind of skipped over, which was the idea, the comical story of Aaron trying to explain himself to Moses of how this calf got there. And so our application for tonight is don't pass the buck. But listen to what it says in Exodus chapter 32, beginning of verse 21. Moses asked Aaron after the golden calf deal, what did these people do to you that you have led them into such a grave sin? And Aaron replied, verse 22, don't be enraged, my Lord. You yourself know that the people are intent on evil. They said to me, make gods for us who will go before us, because this Moses, the man who brought us up from the land of Egypt, we don't know what has happened to him. So I said to them, whoever has gold, take it off. And they gave it to me. When I threw it in the fire, out came this calf. And it is funny. If it weren't true, it would be funny. But Aaron is clearly passing the buck here, right? He doesn't want to own up to his own mistakes. So let's take just a minute and discuss in our groups. What can you say about the importance of owning your mistakes? As organically as it possible, let the discussion include anecdotes and learning from others' mistakes. Talk about that for just a couple minutes.